My friends, good day. A story is unfolding off the coast of Sicily. This, as you have understood, is a special episode. We're going to talk about boats today. Last year in June, we talked about the Titan, if you remember. It was a kind of submarine, if I may say so, a submersible, a kind of tin can in which five people, including some very wealthy ones, who couldn't find anything better to do than lock themselves in that box. I was saying, and then go down in search of the Titanic. They were in the dark, in the darkness that seemed to suffocate them, even before the ocean itself took over. And then at some point, what had to happen happened. An implosion, a story that lasts 3 milliseconds. And they disappear in a cloud of metal and other things. So, in the same vein, in the same kind of stories, we have the death of Bill Gates, the British Bill Gates. So, the British Bill Gates, as his name suggests, is dedicated to computing. For once, it's not someone interested in human health like the American Bill Gates since he left Windows and other Microsoft products. So 3 days ago, I was saying we have Mr. Lynch. So Mr. Lynch is a long story. How am I going to tell you this one? Mr. Lynch had made or built or founded, if you prefer, a company based in Cambridge that dealt with data at a time when everyone was thinking about or considering big learning and big data and things like that. Today, we would be more into artificial intelligence. You know, information technology goes from one trend to another. I was saying he founded a company, Autonomy, and then he sold it to Hewlett-Packard, which is a giant that spends its time swallowing up small companies. Then Hewlett-Packard paid $10 billion for that company, which is an extremely high amount for a startup. A year later, they said, we were scammed. That's it, we were scammed. There was forgery involved. They inflated the value of the company exactly to attract whales like us. So we'd come along just like that, wide open. Then we acquired this company for $10 billion, even though it's not worth it. On top of that, he declares a loss of $9 billion, which means, roughly speaking, we scammed them. 90% of Autonomy's value under Mr. Lynch. He was the founder of Autonomy. He sold it to someone named Robinson, not Robinson. So I'll tell you a personal story along the way, a story that I actually tell with a certain flair, right? In this toxic book, he's called Toxic. It's like that because it talks about the business world. And when we talk about the business world, we're talking about a world full of hostile snakes. So you have to write aggressive C, which is what I did, by the way. So God is my witness, there are a lot of horror stories online. I kept millions of people from sleeping at night, but the worst story I ever told, I told in there. And I'm talking about a company where I was recruited. So I was recruited with the following promise. Let me tell you, there's a headhunter who calls me and says, well, here's a company that's very well run, extremely visionary. And I wasn't convinced because visionary companies called every day for that. Except that he's about to play a big card, he tells me. They have Steve Wozniak as an employee there, one of the founders of Apple. So he literally tells me, if this company is good enough for Steve Wozniak, it must be good enough for you. With that, I was immediately convinced. Well, I didn't let anything show, right? But still, I was convinced. I joined the company, right? And then I find the famous office of Steve Wozniak, except he was never there. And I even asked other colleagues, have you seen him? No, they tell me no. Since we opened, there's this office, there's this pen, a BIC pen on the desk. There are some A4 sheets, and we've never seen him. And so that's it. With that, the chief executive officer leaves. He's replaced by Mr. Shane Robertson, who bought Autonomy from Mr. Lynch. And who was its head, its leader? He was in the trade papers almost every day because of this story. Because Hewlett-Packard fired Shane Robertson because he was the one who signed the deal. And then she also filed a complaint against him. And one day I was in a mountain restaurant in Utah, you know, the kind of restaurant where they film James Bond. Because there are large picture windows and the mountains are covered in snow all around. And then I run into and have a little chat with Shane Robertson at the buffet. And that's when I thought about it a little bit. I'm thinking, how should I put it, about life, about the irony of life sometimes. You know, I had joined a company to meet Steve Wozniak, and I met the sinister Shane Robertson, who bought a worthless company from Mr. Lynch. So, Mr. Lynch, then? I was saying that's why I developed a very particular interest in this story that I followed. Mr. Lynch was extradited to the United States because Americans said he scammed an American company. We want him, just as the United Kingdom extradites its citizens for almost any reason. They put him on a plane, he left. A miracle. It was a miracle. In judicial records, he was acquitted. When? In August 2024. So he was just acquitted. Among the bettors, his odds were 200 to 1. It's clear that for everyone, he was going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The American justice system tends to always favor the American side. How he did it, we don't know. The fact remains that he returned as a hero. From the United States, he left by sea to Sicily to celebrate his victory. And there was with him a very important guy from Morgan Stanley, a guy from the board. He had his lawyers with him, all that. And they were there on a ship, the Bayesian, to party. This party will end tragically, but before that, there is another story. One of the co-defendants, as they say in English, someone who was on trial with Mr. Lynch. Another Englishman, another Briton from Cambridge as well, who, by the way, hadn't really resisted much. And he left. He turned himself into the United States. He didn't wait for the end of the extradition process. He wanted to gain the jury's leniency by surrendering himself. I think he made a tactical move, thinking, if I go on my own, I'll get a bit of sympathy from them. And his move was in fact successful. He was acquitted too, like Mr. Lynch. 4 days ago, Mr. Chamberlain, right? Well, he was out jogging in Cambridge. He was dodging cars. I assure you, that's how it was when I tell you. A car hits him. They call the firefighters. They take him to the hospital, and then they declare him dead. That's it. They call the family. So Mr. Chamberlain exits. Now it's Mr. Lynch. That was 3 days ago. Chamberlain was 4 days ago. Lynch 3 days ago. He's at sea, isn't he? Not very far from Palermo. And then during the night, a sort of mini tornado hits. There's a mini tornado that strikes, that sweeps through the area. All the ships are more or less shaken, but Mr. Lynch's ship is even more shaken than the others. In fact, it's so shaken that in just a few seconds, it will sink completely. I know that this canal is an aviation canal. I'm not a specialist in boats or ships, but I am a specialist in logic and stories that end badly. So let's try to understand why. What are the characteristics of this ship that made it so that if it turned over, it would sink? And the others in the same harbor, even if according to their captain or their passengers, they experienced quite a shake. As we would say in Switzerland, no one capsized, no one drowned, no one had to fear for their life. That boat sank in a matter of seconds. Why? So let me tell you about the Bayesian. For you to understand the story, I need to draw it for you. I'll draw it for you. I'm going to do what's called a freehand drawing. Look at this one. I found a green silo. My daughter took all my silos. I could only find a green silo. So we're working with green today. So as I was saying, the Bayesian, that's it. We have a ship like this. So it's a yacht, it's a sailing yacht, and I was going to say it's also diesel powered. Why? Because you know that very often these yachts have a big sail and all that. It looks like they were designed by Greta Thunberg, but it's just to show that we're eco-friendly, we're green and all that. Actually, it has a 50,000 liter diesel tank, just to let you know. Okay, now for the sail, I'm drawing the mast. Actually, if I want to be precise, if I want to be absolutely precise, I should go all the way up to the ceiling. And there. A 75-meter high mast. Seriously, 75 meters high. When the Bayesian was built by the Italians, by an Italian firm in 2008, its mast was the tallest mast in the world until last year. Don't ask me about the Guinness record. Today, they're at 80 meters. If this continues, we'll eventually have a 200-meter mast. What does the mast do on a ship? You hang sails on it, and then what happens? What happens is that there are forces from the wind that push the ship. But they don't just push the ship, they also tend to tilt it. It's clear that it's as if, imagine, you're on a slope and someone can help push you. Where do they push you from? Usually they have to push you at the lower back, around the waist, where your center of gravity is. If they push you by the head, what will happen? They'll make you fall, they'll make you tip over. So, when there's a force that's high up at that level, it tends to make the ship lean. And since it has the tallest mast, the biggest one on Earth, well, it lost its record since then. Well, it's going to experience a force that's extremely, extremely strong, extremely unusual. To compensate for this, the engineers did this. They're going to install a keel, okay? So they're going to install a rod, right? And then there's a mast, some kind of ovoid or something like that. You see something like that with a hydrodynamic shape, right? And it's at a depth of 10 meters to create, if you will, to compensate for the size of this mast. And the force that's on it to prevent the pole from tipping over or capsizing in the slightest wind. Now, there's a problem. It's that this boat now is going to have the wake of a tanker behind it. Because 10 meters of draft means that the keel goes down as far as 10 meters. How are we going to get into a port? It's not possible. Most marinas and all that don't allow you to come in with that kind of draft. So what happens then? The keel is retractable, so very often there's an option to retract the keel so you can lift it up. So it actually goes in between. At its highest, between 4 meters, and at its lowest, at 10 meters, you see? The keel is between 4 and 10 meters. Okay, so now we can start to visualize a scenario. What could have happened? Because the boat, as I was saying, capsized, like it sank at a depth of 50 meters. There were 22 people inside. Some managed to jump into the water. They were rescued by the surrounding boats. But unfortunately, many others, 6 others, 7 others rather, well, they died, we presumed as such. 6 bodies were recovered in Mr. Lynch's today. He was found inside a cabin floating ominously. In a calm, in a very paradoxical calm, among sheets, mattresses, and objects. You know, a kind of scene almost magical that could have been imagined by Salvador Dali. Something surreal, right? He found some in there. They took him out. 6 dead bodies were found. And his 18-year-old daughter is missing. They haven't found her yet. It's possible she's still on the boat. They're struggling to search due to overturned furniture and floating objects, as I mentioned earlier. Also remember, there's not much at 50 meters. In terms of scuba diving at 50 meters on normal dives, on dives with air tanks and all that, at 50 meters you have little time at depth. Even at 40 meters I've dived there and it's not really much. Very pleasant dives, thanks to 40 meters. The air becomes so rough. You start to have strange ideas in your head, all that. You come out, you're tired, you're not allowed to dive for the rest of the day and everything. So these aren't really dives we like to do every day. The last time I did that was, I think, 2 years ago in Antalya, when I dived on a French ship that was sunk off the coast of Antalya. But that's all. Usually these aren't dives where you can stay for a long time. So at 40 meters, I was saying 10 minutes at 50 meters. There must be 5 minutes at the bottom before you have to do decompression stops. Decompression stops increase rapidly and need extensive infrastructure. If you have to make long decompression stops, you need people with tanks at those levels or use bells and similar equipment. It's a whole infrastructure that the locals don't have. So they just... The diving club used up their tanks and are now making do. You see, that's why it takes time. The idea, as I was saying, is that if the keel is out, let's say this is the sea, so if the keel is out, let's imagine, for example, that our ship is tilted, for example, by 45 degrees. Okay, this is the ship's surface. Here's the keel and our mast. The mast is so tall it wouldn't fit under the Eiffel Tower, not even on the first floor. If we put it near the Eiffel Tower, its tip would sit between the first and second floors. So let's say there's a wind coming. Like this, the wind tilts it. It hits the mast, tilting 45 degrees. While it tilts this one 45 degrees, it also raises the ball 45 degrees. So the force of this one, the restoring force increases as we tilt it more, and the force from the mast decreases. Why? At 45 degrees, what's the mast's equivalent surface area? I'm referring to the mast. I don't care if there are sails or not. They're not necessary, and in fact there weren't any. The surveillance cameras captured the Bayesian's boat, which was parked just a few hundred meters from the coast. So there are surveillance cameras, restaurants, all of that, filming the boat offshore. Offshore, we're only talking about 200 to 300 meters. It had no sails up. They were all put away. There's only the surface of the mast, but it's enough to catch the wind. Huge. So, as I was saying, at 45 degrees, what does the wind see? At 45 degrees, wind affects 70% of the mast's height. You see? Because the mast tilts, the mast leans over, so the wind resistance will decrease. Now, if the ship tilts to 60 degrees from the vertical, right? So it's 30 degrees from the water. At that moment, what do you call that? It's going to drop even more. Well, I don't have the number in mind. Wait, 60 degrees, that'll make 0.5. Yes, that'll make 0.5. Only half will be left. Don't quote me on that. I need to check the math. Only about half will be exposed to the wind from the mast. So if we take the idea all the way and imagine there's a very strong wind that has completely knocked the ship over. Can you imagine that at 80 degrees? So we have 10% at 10 degrees from the horizontal. We're like this. Okay, we're like this. We have our ship, which is at 10 degrees. Okay. And here you see that the mast almost doesn't catch the wind at all anymore. At 80 degrees. Like this, it might have. Maybe. Well, I'm just saying this off the top of my head. I'll redo the calculations. Afterwards, I think it lost 80% of its wind resistance. There must be roughly, I think, 15 to 17% maximum wind resistance left. Okay, so at that point, the ball is at its maximum, almost at its maximum leverage. And that one is at its minimum wind resistance. So you see that the boat can tilt that far and then it can come back afterwards. As soon as the wind slows down or stops, it will come back, okay? Because of our restoring force. Now, several problems. They apparently had some portholes open, so if the boat tilts this way and there are open portholes, that is to say, it was a beautiful evening, they left the portholes open, which normally don't touch the water. But if the ship tilts that way, it's clear that a lot of water will get in, and then it will speed up its fate. Another question arises. Is it? Was the keel not raised? Was the keel only at 4 meters? In that case, it wouldn't have enough strength to fight against the wind. And then the boat can actually turn around. That means it can capsize. And if the boat turns over, well, that's bad. Because the reality is, once the boat turns over, the keel will weigh down on it. That means this keel. Now, if we take our ship again, look, if we take our ship like this is still the water. Now, let's imagine that the mast has gone under the water. Why does it go underwater when the wind stops? Why does it sink? What's pushing it? Why? Because the wind, you can imagine it's going to make it tip over, but why would it go under the water? The reason is probably if the keel is lifted, there's an inertial force, there's inertia in that mass. If that mass is pushed suddenly afterwards, so it keeps being pushed, the force of the wind weakens, of course, as it tips over. At a certain point, it reaches the horizontal, and given its length, its weight, and the speed it has gained, it's not going to stop. It's going to keep going. It's going to keep going. It hits the water. It goes under the water. So when it goes under the water, like this, where is the keel now? The keel is above the boat. What will it do? It's going to press down on it, of course. This time it means the keel is coming out of the water. So two things are going to happen. It will weigh more. Actually, it weighs the same. If a keel weighs, I don't know, let's say it weighs 5 tons. It weighs 5 tons in the air. It weighs 5 tons underwater. And it will weigh 5 tons on the moon. Mass is a universal value. It doesn't change depending on the conditions. But you get what I mean. Let's talk about weight. Let's say the apparent weight of the thing. It increases as it rises. If the keel suddenly leaves the water, the buoyant force on the keel no longer exists. So suddenly the force it has becomes higher. This time it's outside and above the ship. So what does it do? It tends, if we look at a movement like this, the keel tends to go like this. And the ship, which is filling with water this time, will go like this. You see? So the ship will go. The people inside, they are, of course, trapped. They don't have time to realize. There's going to be a little war. With who? With the descendants and the family, and the family of Mr. Lynch. Because this ship, which was managed by a company called Camper Nicholson, from Geneva, if you look on the Camper Nicholson website, in Switzerland, they rent this kind of ship. And they rent them for 200,000 euros a week. See, that's why our price matches the Titan. So we have ultra luxurious ships that are rented for 200,000 euros a week with their crew. And I imagine they must have lower operating costs, right? For their operations. We don't expect them to sink so quickly. We don't expect to have just a fraction of a second and they flip over and we're underwater and we don't have time to leave our room. We don't expect that. Yet, yes, the thing is, my friends, if it looks weird, it is weird. Your safety, I'd like to tell you once again, your safety is your responsibility. It's yours. Just because someone charges you 200,000 euros a week for a service doesn't mean the service is safe. Just because it's beautiful, shiny and decorated doesn't mean. The problem with this ship, as soon as you see it coming, you see that mast rising up almost to the sky, that mast that, if we're close to airports and all, there should be lights, International Civil Aviation Organization lights, aviation lights, and all that. You're the least foolish. You question things, you wonder, but how does it respond to the wind? If there's wind, how will it react? The thing is, it looks like a trap, so it could very easily flip that damn ship over. And that's exactly what happened. So are we imagining the scene? People were on that ship. They almost use it they almost use them like restaurants. Not like restaurants, like hotels, that's what it means. They weren't sailing. They park it off the coast of a village. Nice, picturesque, with good restaurants and everything. And then they go back and forth all day with a motorboat to go to the restaurant and everything. And then after, when it's the end of the day, they come back to sleep on the ship, party a little and everything. They sleep well. So it's used as a floating hotel. We're not in navigation mode, so we're very close to the coast. It is, how should I put it, reasonable to think that the ship was not ready for navigation. That means we're letting ourselves go. The portholes are open. When a client pays 200,000 euros a week, he opens the portholes. You're not going to go tell him, listen, here's the safety and all that. We all know there are a lot of private jets flying. People smoke on board. People don't have their seatbelts fastened and all that. Because we can't say no to them. We're not on Ryanair, you know what I mean. So The acquisition has increased because we're relatively close. We're relatively close to the coast. What could happen? I mean, we're anchored in the harbor. What could happen? They're asleep between 4 and 5 a.m. At that point, they don't have anyone on watch. It seems they ignored the weather alerts despite warnings and storms. And honestly, when you're skippering a ship with a 75-meter mast, to be frank, that's just the opinion of a non-sailor. But personally, I would always have someone keeping watch through the night, no matter what. And before people go to sleep, I would put the ship in position. I would set it to maximum. Because I know it's something that can turn 180 degrees in the time it takes you to count to 3. That wasn't done, or it wouldn't have flipped over, right? So, what's happening? The guys, they're sleeping. Everyone is sleeping. We're not paying attention to the alerts. I mean, we could have billed, I don't know, instead of billing 200,000 euros a week, we could have billed, I don't know, maybe 220. Add someone who stays up all night to monitor the weather. It can help sometimes. So at some point, this mini tornado happens. What's the end result? The end result, it hits the ship. People wake up without time to react. There are already water spouts and more. And on top of that, imagine even if the furniture and everything on these ships is usually secured, they're screwed in, everything is fixed, but it's not obvious either. There was a cook who died. The rest of the crew managed to get out because the advantage the crew has is that they know the place by heart. They know the place by heart, so they can get out more quickly. And then the poor passengers, well, that's how it is. Among them, there's Lynch, who was found. He's dead. And then there's his daughter. He has an 18-year-old daughter who is missing. So I think that in the coming hours, unfortunately, they'll find her body. He doesn't have much hope, does he? Yes. So there you go. I just wanted to tell you that always zero trust, my friends. Honestly, still zero trust. The Bayesian, by the way, belongs to Mr. Lynch's family, okay? But it was managed by his father, Nicholson. And this kind of ship rents for 200,000 euros a week. He bought it for 30 million pounds sterling. We're talking about 35,000 euros, which for the usage, it's true that it comes to 200,000 euros a week, even if it's yours. So, my friends, it's a nasty story that always shows us decisions that disregard, that seem to completely ignore the laws of physics. And in terms of what will happen, in terms of legal disputes and everything, that will be the position of the established facts. If the divers find that the established fact has risen, if they find it at 4 meters, it means it has risen. It means it wasn't balanced. I think that's what they'll find, but we'll see. That will be their fault if they lose. It will be the captain's fault. If the captain made a serious mistake, he raised the established fact, so he didn't secure his ship. He slept with the portholes open. There was a gust of wind, the ship turned around, then it sank, then it killed everyone. So that's the captain's fault. Now, if we find out that Akis was lying down, it means he was 10 meters away and he still turned around. So then that would give the case a different perspective, and it would be more the fault of the ship's manufacturers. So there you go. I'll keep you updated later if there is any more information. By the way, something I wanted to tell you is about the people on the star. What's it called? The Boeing Starliner remains stuck above us. It's a real mess over there on the International Space Station, orbital station. They don't know how to come down. Well, come down, you know what I mean, in that sense. Bringing back to Earth the 2 astronauts who were sent on June 5th for a mission that was supposed to last about a week. And they're stuck up there until now. And we have no idea when we're going to bring them back. The word stuck is not very appreciated by Boeing. But if you stop people on a bus going to Mantes-la-Jolie and explain the situation to them, they'll all say the word is stuck. Extremely appropriate. It's a rule that's used in British courts. Stop a bus and ask reasonable people, everyday people. They're asked, is this your opinion? Are these people stuck? And then it's their opinion that matters, not the opinions of experts who are going to argue over words and all that. That's it. Reasonably, it's reasonable to think that today they're stuck in space. So how are they going to bring them back? We don't know. It's a mystery. No one has a clue. A lot of problems. The hydraulic circuit, or rather the helium circuit, it went into space. It leaked, didn't it? Of 28 engines, 5 failed. The last issue is software related. So that's what we know. There might be others that we'll discover later. They should never have touched such technology, Boeing. They should have stuck to planes, which they already have a lot of problems with. Thank you, my friends, for listening to this video up to this point. I'll stop here and be back next time. See you soon.